Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Trasna na Tira. As we've done since the start of this lecture series, we've always tried to share some of our history. And this evening, we're going to share the history of Kerry during the Civil War. So we have a number of stories that we're going to share. I'm joined here this evening by Martin Moore. He has written a book on commemorations and his involvement in Kerry's fight for freedom in the North Kerry area. And I'm also joined by Lawlor, who's very interested, a historian on Kerry's history, and has helped me out on Kerry's Fight for Freedom Facebook page. So you're welcome along this evening. I'm just going to reshare my screen because someone had told me that I am not sharing it. So just give me 1 second. And hopefully you'll all see it. And I'm just going to kick off, I suppose, getting right into it. And I suppose, can you see that? So that's a map of Ireland. Hopefully that's visible, Martin.
No.
Nope. Okay. So again. Is that screen visible there?
What I can see is the Kilcummin photograph with 4 photos at the base of my... There's something happening now.
Maybe it's just slow coming through because my Wi-Fi is particularly slow this evening.
Can the rest see this map of Ireland?
Okay, you can see the Kilcummin photograph now, Martin, can you?
No, I can't see anything now. I can see the Kilcummin photo now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, there's slides over to the left.
Okay, great. You should be able to see the map of Ireland at this stage, or maybe it's just a few seconds slow coming through.
No.
Can anyone see that? No?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I'm getting warnings here that my internet connection is unstable. Okay, I'm just going to email this to Eve and we'll get back on here at this time. So if we say 10 minutes past 8, because obviously my Wi-Fi is too poor and I can't share my screen. Is that okay? Or people can stay on here and have a chat and we can have the what do you reckon?
Yeah, try one, yeah.
Right, okay. We're going to drive on. We don't need PowerPoint for this. So, do you know what? I'm going to kick off with Pat. And Pat, on the 2nd of August, Paddy O'Daly's Dublin Brigade, Dublin Guards landed in Feenit. So do you want to take it off? What happened after Feenit and subsequent 24, 48 hours and the real start of the Civil War in Kerry?
Well, obviously the fighting started in Dublin, and Michael Collins came up with a plan to take Munster by sea. So on the 31st of July 1922, the Lady Wicklow left Dublin to come into Feenit, and they landed on this about 10:30 on August 2nd. They came into Feenit. Now, the Republican Army had Fianna Pier mined the night before, or maybe 2 nights before, because they were anticipating a landing. And unfortunately, local fishermen now, they were concerned about their jobs, their livelihood. And somehow they found out about the mine, so they had the mine, the wire cut. Now, only for that, it was said that it could have been the Free Staters Gallipoli. They'd have landed, but they wouldn't have been able to. Well, at least they would have been delayed. Well, they took Fianna anyway, no trouble at all, because most of the North Kerry Republican Army were actually fighting in Limerick at the time. Limerick, Tipperary, that way. From Limerick to Waterford at that time was known as it was a line. It was known as the Munster Republic. So that's actually where Michael Collins' plan came in, to take Kerry by sea, Kerry and Cork, and Limerick and Clare. Anyway, like I said, they landed around 10:30, took Fianna. They came from Fianna then, and when they came into the spa, they were going to branch off, and one section was going to go by the beach towards Blennerville, and another section was going to go, there was basically a pincer movement, go straight into Tralee by Pembroke Street. And they were with the sole objective of taking Ballymullen Barracks. Of course, whatever volunteers were left in Tralee at the time, of course, there was fierce panic when they heard about the landing. John Joe Sheehy told a number of volunteers to head for Fianna to make sure it was true. And when that was confirmed, it was just panic, trying to get a column organised. So by the time the column was organised, they were at Kilfenora, and that's where the first Free State casualty. He was Private Patrick Quinn, and he was killed at Kilfenora. Shortly after that, then, an Irish Republican Army volunteer, John O'Sullivan, was killed at Sammy's Rock, just on the Tralee side of Kilfenora. There was not much more than after that. The Irish Republican Army had to retreat back into Tralee. It was in Tralee where most of the, I suppose I wouldn't call it fighting, but resistance took place. The column that went by the Spa Beach was, they came into Tralee, no problem, but it was the section of the Free State Army that came in by Pembroke Street. They met with fierce resistance. Johnny O'Connor had a Lewis gun on top of one of the mills. I think it was Shamrock Mills. And actually, to be honest, it was just outside my window here that 7 Free State soldiers were cut down by Johnny O'Connor. And it was Niall Harrington, 21 years of age. He was selected by Paddy O'Daly because he was a native of, Niall Harrington was a native of Tralee. So Paddy O'Daly selected him to be a guide because he knew the town well. So instead of going straight up through the town, they took a detour and came down by Nelson Street. Nelson Street at the time, it's now Ash Street. And up by the Bank of Ireland, that's where the Free State Army, their second fatality. Just beside the Bank of Ireland, his name was Larkin. The Republican Army also had a barricade outside at the junction of Motherwell and Butterby. But like I said, the Republican Army, like I said, I mean, they didn't really anticipate a landing, and at such short notice, there was little resistance, and Ballymullen Barracks was taken by about 6:30 in the evening. So between landing in Phoenix and the taking of Tralee, it took just over 8 hours.
And
with 9 Free State fatalities and 2 IRA fatalities. The other being Thomas Flynn. He was killed in the spot.
And Pat, I have a question for you there, and it's one I've always thought of myself is, did the anti-treaty in Kerry just not anticipate being attacked by sea, or were so many of them, you know, up around the front between, you know, Limerick and Waterford area, that they left their rear undefended as such?
Oh, it was fiercely undefended, yes. It was a mixture of both. I mean, I don't think they anticipated being attacked from sea. And of course, yeah, a lot of the veterans were in Limerick and Tipperary at the time.
And the numbers that attacked, the numbers that landed at Phoenix, seem relatively small. You know, you're talking 400 or 500.
450.
450.
Yeah.
And that amount would have been sufficient to take Tralee, so that the resistance in Tralee itself was relatively low.
Oh yes. Oh, there was no problem taking Tralee.
Can I come in there?
You can, Martin. Thanks a million.
Yeah, so just to put the whole thing in context, and I think that the best place for anyone, particularly anyone from outside Ireland looking at this, is we have to start back at the First World War. And the First World War was all about the protection of the rights of small nations. And so it wasn't lost on the nationalists and the Republican military-minded people of Ireland that Ireland was a small nation then fighting for its freedom. So in the immediate aftermath, at the end of the First World War, a guerrilla campaign started and resulted by July 1921 in the British calling a cessation of hostilities, followed by a treaty agreed between the representatives of the Irish volunteers on one side, the IRA, and the British government on the other side. Unfortunately, the IRA split into 2 camps there in the spring of 1922. And just to bring it into a Kerry context, fighting broke out between those 2 parties in Dublin at the end of June 1922 with the attack on the forecourts, which was one of the main administrative buildings in Dublin. And symbolically, back in 1916, during the First World War, the forecourts had been held as part of the Irish Volunteers' plan to take the city to secure the freedom back in Easter week of that year. So the holding and garrisoning of the forecourts was hugely symbolic. And here I have the Irish Times that announced, look, it probably can't be seen there, but it says something that's 8 days war in Dublin, and it shows a picture of the forecourts and quite extensive reporting on the attack in the forecourts in Dublin at the end of June 1922. Now, to bring it down to Kerry, 200 miles down to the extreme southwest of Ireland, believe it or not, there was fighting in Listowel just as the forecourts surrendered. So there was a Free State garrison. The IRA in North Kerry split along similar lines, and there was a detachment, particularly of the 3rd Battalion, which would be centred on Lixna, that took the Free State side, and they garrisoned themselves inside in Listowel. So they were seriously outnumbered by the people that opposed the treaty, and they were known as the Republicans, the anti-treatyites. There was various names given to them, but for this discussion, we'll just call them the IRA. So on the 30th of June 1922, the IRA, including backup from units in Ballymacalligat and Tralee, came to Listowel, and they cleared the Free State garrison out of the town. And they compelled a significant garrison there to surrender. Now, in the aftermath of that, they were either released or some of them joined the IRA themselves. Okay, so the IRA then felt that Kerry as such was secure, and 4 columns were mobilised to back up then to shore up the defence in Limerick and Tipperary, as Pat has said. And my grandfather, for example, with a few more lads from Listowel, fought up in Tipperary. They were involved in an incident where a Free State officer called Furlong was killed. These would be the early days of the Civil War. Now, inside in Tralee, there was an organisational problem at the time, and the events of the Pat refers to of the early August 1922 have to be seen in the context of a split of the Tralee battalion, and which resulted in the formation of a new battalion, a new unit. So the IRA within Tralee were seriously disorganised, and Liam Deasy, a divisional officer, a Cork officer, came down to Castle Island around the 30th of July trying to patch this up. And it was all patched up at that meeting. But what the IRA didn't realise is that it was already too late, because, as Pat says, the Lady Wicklow was now on her way with 450 Dublin Guards about to land in Feenet. Now, the IRA did anticipate that there could be a seaborne landing, but the problems that were there is there could be landings in Kinmare, there could be landings somewhere in the Killorglin area, maybe Castlemaine. Feenet being a port was the most likely place, but also Tarbert. So the coastline was quite extensive, and they couldn't cover all the eventualities. But they did have an outpost behind in Feenet, and it was led by Tommy Sheehy. He was the captain of the Oak Park in Tralee Company, and he had men with him, including Seamus O'Connor, who was known as Jimmy the Master from Knocknagoshel. And the whole defence there revolved, as Pat has said, around a mine that was going out onto the pier. And the pier at the time was a timber pier, so they figured that, we'll say, if there was a seaborne landing in Feenet, there was no need to have a huge IRA presence in the Tralee area, that this would take care of it. So there was no plan B, is the problem. And that together with the organisational problem of the Tralee battalion, really was the fault line on which the Republican defence fell. Anyhow, they landed, and there was a number of Tralee men, not just Niall Harrington. Harrington was a lieutenant, but there was a very capable sergeant in that party as well, and his name was Jack Lydon. And Jack Lydon was from James's Street in Tralee. He was killed afterwards, subsequently, during the Civil War. And as I understand it, Jack Lydon's party was to lead the way in along by Cockleshell, as it would be known locally, in towards Blennerville, as Pat has alluded to there. In the meantime, Sheehy and Tralee got word from the garrison in Feenet that the Free State had landed, so they mobilised a column that commandeered a truck in Tralee, and they came out from the barracks. And Mick McGlynn, who was a very prominent activist then and subsequently, was in charge of that party. And they threw out a party at Sammy's Rock, where, as Pat has said, Lieutenant Johnny Sullivan, he was from Moghashla, behind in West Kerry, and he was working in Tralee at the time. He was a ginger-haired lad, and he was unfortunately killed in the fighting there. There was insufficient men there. The best they could do was hold up this advance. That once the troops got a foothold at all, it was no longer a Gallipoli. They had achieved what the Anzac forces hadn't done in New Zealand. They had secured their base, and they had pushed on immediately within a day. The New Zealand forces in Gallipoli were held up for months and effectively made no further inroads at all. But it could, as Pat has said, if the mine had been blown, at the very least they would have been contained in Feenet. The Free State pushed on into Tralee with the main defence being led from the Shamrock Mills by a machine gun team under Johnny Connor from Farmers Bridge, who was a prominent activist in the previous War of Independence. As Pat has said, most of the activists, all the old active servicemen, there was two types of IRA volunteering, you've got to understand. There was kind of support staff that really never handled a gun ever. In fact, I remember one activist that I met in his later life, and we were discussing the Civil War, and he was given a job on outpost to protect a party that were demolishing a bridge, and he was handed a 303 rifle, and believe it or not, he couldn't fire it when the Free State came on. So you've got to understand that the two type of people, the active service people that had experience of being under fire, they were in Limerick and Tipperary. Tom Mack would be the most obvious one, but people now, the Tralee activists such as Jerry Miles were up in Limerick. There was a good column. Dennis Quill was leading the column with my grandfather up in Tipperary. All the old active servicemen were up the country. So if anyone else wants to pick up there from that.
No, I have a question for you there, Martin, and thanks for the contribution. There's kind of a feeling in Kerry, I suppose, that most of Kerry went on the anti-treaty side. What's your thoughts on that? What was the split? Like we hear throughout the country that it was kind of, neighbour against neighbour, brother against brother. Was it that black and white in Kerry, or was it not? Was the Civil War really as divisive in Kerry as it was throughout the rest of the country?
There's a number of questions contained in that, Liam. And I suppose looking at the bigger picture, overall, you could say the IRA took the anti-treaty or Republican side in Kerry during the Civil War. But there was a number of very key men in key areas that swung people. So, for example, above in North Kerry now, a lot of the 3rd Lixna Battalion, men like Jack Lynch, Tom Shanahan, T.P. O'Shea, a few more like that, Paddy Mangan, they were all ex-servicemen. And Con Brosnan and my van, the prominent footballer, swung a lot of men over in the my van district. So they've kind of backboned the unit that formed in Listowel in the early days of the Civil War. So up in North Kerry, in my experience, it went about 50-50, believe it or not. Down in Tralee, there was a minority when Free State. The principal Free State man in Tralee was a junior officer called Eamon Horn. But Eamon Horn was a very brave and probably a kind of a reckless sort of man, if I may say so. He was a very determined fighter, but he went Free State, and a lot of them kept low key. So men like Jack Lydon that I mentioned earlier on, they're never mentioned in any account of the Troubles at all. Then we'll say down towards Killarney, that was real Republican heartland. Generally, the countryside went Republican, and the towns were perceived to be more sympathetic to the Free State side. In Kinmare, the two Connor brothers, principally Tom Scott Dean, brought in a lot of support with him in a wide area of countryside down in South Kerry. So subsequent to the landings in Venus, there was subsequent backup landings in Tarbert, which caused further diversion. And again, this is liaising with the Free State troops in North Kerry and at Kenmare and Wartville, which really had the effect of splitting up the Republican forces even further as well. In the meantime now, the defence in Limerick had fallen apart and activists were coming back. And believe it or not, there was a lot of dissension between themselves over, there was no clear leadership and plan as to what to do next. And effectively, the Free State rolled on and effectively steamrolled through Kerry. Literally within a day of the landing, they were in Castle Island. The store just fell very easily. And what happened now is that the activists were known, so they knew who to pick out. So men like Brian Grady of Ballylongford, who had served in the old North Kerry column, was very active in picking up Republican activists. And they knew their haunts and habits, so it was quite an easy thing to do. With regard to the brother fighting brother, the best story I got on that comes from the Kilflynn company. And before the Civil War broke out at all, the companies up and down the county were meeting and holding meetings in school halls and any kind of a hall, maybe an old volunteer hall or whatever. But in the Kilflynn company, a very interesting story emerged, and the the membership was called in to see what their views on the treaty were. And believe it or not, the entire company went Free State, except for one man. And that man was George Shea. And George Shea was the captain of the company. So the captain was left on his own. Now, as it happened, subsequently, some more of the Kilflynn company were killed in Ballyseedy, which we'll talk about in a while if I don't run out of time. I've had too long.
Be well. You're
right?
grand.
But, for example, so one of the men killed in Ballyseedy actually took the Free State site at that initial meeting, believe it or not. That's how it was very close. So what they were, what was at issue? So what was at issue for the volunteers? The volunteers of Fowler Collins felt that they had enough here out of the treaty to build on, that they could secure an independent republic. Whereas the IRA viewed it that this was a total sellout and that there was no way they'd let down their deceased comrades that had fallen in the fight for freedom by this shortcoming. It came up short what was signed in things. So that was fundamentally it. Now, I should add as well, because Pat, I know, will want to talk about this. In the meantime, some of the North Kerry activists had gone to Donegal up in the north, 200 miles north, including Charlie Daly, and a good unit from the store, including the like of Martin Quill. And a man that's never mentioned at all, Michael Pike in McKelligot. So, Pat, I'll let you in because I could do it now.
Thanks, Martin. And actually, I have just a thought there is my own grandfather fought in the War of Independence and the Civil War. His own family heard a little bit about his War of Independence activities. Never mentioned anything in terms of the Civil War. So I'd say there's a huge tract of knowledge and of history that hasn't been shared, and it kind of was an eye-opener for me. If anyone out there has had a chance to download that book, it was written by Dorothy McCardle in 1924 up in Dublin. So it was captured from 22 and 23. It's an absolute eye-opener. It is the contemporaneous activities in Kerry during the Civil War, and it's well worth anyone picking up. And Pat, I'll pass over to you now. So in terms of Ballyseedy, and we have Ballyseedy, we have Countess Bridge, we have Carsiveen, within a very short period of time, an absolutely vicious time during the Civil War in Kerry. Can you share what happened?
Well, on March 5th, 1923, there was a mine explosion in Knocknagoshel. There was a Free State soldier by the name of Paddy O'Connor, and let's just say he wasn't very nice to Republican prisoners, and the IRA decided to target him, to assassinate him. So they planted a landmine in Knocknagoshel and got a member of the Cumann to forge a letter pretending to be from an informer, saying that there was an arms dump or a dugout at Barnarrig Wood in Knocknagoshel. So the boys landed out anyway, the Free Staters, Paddy O'Connor and a gang, and so they landed anyway into the wood, and next thing anyway, the mine exploded. Paddy O'Connor killed. There was a Galvin, I think, from Killarney. There was a soldier from Causeway in North Kerry, and there was 2 Dublin lads. I think there was 5 killed. Martin might be able to clarify that. I think it was 5. So the following night anyway, Ballyseedy, and on the same night, Ballyseedy, roughly around the same time, about 2 a.m, at Countess Bridge, there was 5 prisoners brought out: Ger O'Donoghue, Stephen Buckley, Dan Donoghue, Tim Murphy, and Ty Coffey. They were told to clear a barricade, and the same thing as Ballyseedy, except that these boys now, these volunteers, they weren't tied together. They just detonated the mine. Ty Coffey managed to survive. So he managed to run from Killarney all the way to Kilcummin into the safe house. They were brought from the Great Southern Hotel, which is now, it's the Malton now. I think they were brought from there anyway, which is the same place that Bertie Murphy, yes, Martin, yes, Bertie Murphy, that's where he was killed, just outside. That was the barracks that time. Another forgotten incident as well, of course, everybody thinks of Ballyseedy, everybody remembers Ballyseedy. But a week later was Bahacks in Carsavine, which was the 12th of March. Volunteers William Reid and Dan Shea, Eugene Dwyer, John Shugcrew and Michael Courtney. And this time the Free State Army made sure that there was no one to escape because they were shot in the legs first before they were put over the mine. And there was a story going around afterwards that the farmer that owned the land next to where the mine exploded, he couldn't put his horses out in the field because the smell of blood drove them mad, and they wouldn't stay in the field. I always think of Bahacks because, like I said, it's the forgotten one.
It is, and we actually had a clip there from Stephen Fuller from Ballyseedy. So he gave an interview, I think, in the 1960s or the 1970s, the BBC documentary. I remember watching it probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was a fantastic interview. It was up on YouTube. It's now been taken down for some reason, but it was very honest, but it was full of forgiveness as well. And I often thought that's a real symbolism of, you know, a man who should have probably died during our Civil War, kind of having no bitterness afterwards. So Niamh, if you're still okay to share there. Thanks, Niamh. We'll just see what Stephen Fuller has to say.
In the field, many more anti-treaty Republicans were killed out of hand when they surrendered.
He gave us a cigarette. He said, that's the last cigarette he'll ever again smoke. He said, we're going to blow you up at a mine, a wildflower mine. Anyone didn't say anything. We were moved out into the yard and marched into a lorry and made lie flat down in the lorry and taken out to Ballyseedy. We arrived out and the language was abusive language, wasn't too good. But one fella called us Irish bastards. And he says, maybe someday might go to heaven. He said he might meet our fellas there. And they tied us in, our hands behind our back, and left about a foot between the hands, like, and the next fella. And they tied us in a circle in around the mine. And they tied our legs in, and the knees as well with a rope. And then they took off our caps and they said we could be praying away now as long as we like. So the next fellow to me said his prayers and I said mine too. But I still kept watching where they went, like. It was that saved me afterwards. But he said goodbye then and I said goodbye, and the next fellow picked it up and he said goodbye lads, and up it went. And I went up with it, of course.
Thanks for that, Niamh. That was great. Perfect timing. So another one of the incidents we want to cover tonight is a particularly tragic one up in North Kerry at Clashmealcon Caves. And I know this is this is one of the topics that are close to your heart, Pat, in terms of what happened there during the Civil War. So I'll hand over to you.
Yes, it is close to me because my mother was a great friend and neighbour of Aero Lyons' sister. Timothy was his Christian name. They called him Aero because he had a habit of just turning up out of the blue. I think I think the name came from there was an ambush in Abbeydorney at Shannon Bridge, and he was at one end of the road and just out of the blue. Then he was at the other end of the road near the bridge, and he actually shot dead an auxiliary. I don't know, was he captain? He was high ranking anyway, but he shot him dead. So anyway, going back to Clashmealcon, it began on April 15th. There was an ambush before that anyway, and April 15th they took refuge in a cave down by Clashmealcon. It's called Dunworth's Cave. It was named after a Fenian who hid there previously in 1867. So 6 volunteers took refuge there. One of their column was actually arrested and he was interrogated in Ballymullen Barracks. That man's name was James McGrath. And he was tortured and he was forced to give the location of where the other lads were hiding. Now, he thought they weren't there, so that's why he said that the lads were in Dunworth's Cave. But on the 16th of April 1923, the Free Staters landed out, and two of the Free Staters tried to climb down the cliffs to apprehend the Irish Republican Army members, and the 2 of them were shot, more than likely by Aero Lyons because he was an expert marksman. But when that failed, they took turf out of the nearby cottages and they tried to smoke them out. That failed, and the night shortly then after. Sorry, I'm just trying to think. There was about 2 or 3. If you can picture this now, there's it's like a horseshoe. Clashmealcon is like a horseshoe. There's one big cave which is Dunworth's, and off that way then there's another 2 or 3 caves. So they climbed out in the middle of the night and they hid in another cave. So basically the Free Staters were concentrating their fire on the original cave, but the lads were gone. They were gone to the other cave. It's hard to explain. I'd have to show you the picture. So anyway, on the night of the 17th, in volunteers Patrick O'Shea and Tom McGrath, they decided that to try to swim to safety. They tried to swim around to try and climb up the other side of the cliff and escape and try and get help. But unfortunately, the tide was in and they drowned and their bodies were never found. So there was only 4 left in the cave then, 5 actually, including James McGrath. On April 18th, around 12 o'clock on April 18th, after 3 days inside the cave, Aero Lyons said that he'd surrender. So he sent a message up. They left down a rope anyway, so they were sending messages up by rope. Aero Lyons said that he'd surrender himself to save the others. So the Free Staters said they'd agree. So they left down the rope anyway. So Airlines said he'd climb up to negotiate a surrender. And it was always said that they cut the rope. But it was also said that the rope snapped. Now, obviously, I think the rope was cut by one of the Free Staters. So he fell 100 feet off the cliff, and they riddled him with machine gun fire. So after that, anyway, with Airlines dead, he was commandant. So James McHenry was captain. So he was next in line. He was in charge. So then he negotiated the surrender. So it was James McHenry and volunteer Edward Graney and Reginald Hathaway. Reginald Hathaway actually was a double deserter. He was in the British Army first. He deserted from the British Army and joined the Republican Army. Then he joined the Free State Army and went back to the Republican Army. He was an Englishman. Now, his name mightn't have been Reginald Hathaway. He had 2 or 3 aliases, he actually had a very interesting story. But anyway, James, Edward, and Reginald were executed in Ballyseedy Barracks on the 25th of April 1923. And Airlines' body was washed up on the 5th of May 1923. And he's buried alongside his comrades that died at Ballyseedy, Timothy Toomey and George O'Shea.
I have a question there, Pat, and it's one that's kind of been bouncing around in my head for a long time. Is when you see how, I suppose, a surrender on the anti-treaty side has been treated, would that have sent out a signal to the other anti-treaty people throughout Kerry to say, surrender doesn't really mean much? You're either going to be, cut from the end of a rope, or you're going to be executed shortly. So, what's the value in surrendering?
Well, from what happened in Kerry during the Civil War, I don't think surrender means anything, because I think very, very little volunteers who were, in inverted commas, executed during the Civil War. They never got a trial. It was murder, basically. So surrender basically just meant nothing to the Free State Army.
Yeah.
And
we see that right throughout Kerry.
Oh yeah.
The fighting, was guerrilla warfare. It was particularly bitter on both sides, but unlike other warfare you look throughout the world, surrender really wasn't an option.
Oh God, no. Well, it's just that the lads in Clashmealcon basically had no option, because they were literally in a hole.
Great. They were literally. And thanks for that, Pat. And now I'm just going to unmute Martin. Hi, Martin. Not sure if Neve can get to the unmute button, but I'm struggling to get Martin unmuted there.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Sorry, you were stuck. You're stuck on mute.
Yeah,
thanks for chipping in.
Yeah, so there's a bit more to all this. So if we go back to the Free State landing in August 1922, shortly afterwards, there was allegations against the Free State regime that they were shooting men that had surrendered out of hand. And as early as August 1922, this allegation surfaced with shooting of a young volunteer in Tralee called Moriarty. And a chap called Healy, who was a brother of the man that shot the Major, Con Healy's brother, was seriously wounded. That's in the tragedy of Kerry that you alluded to earlier on. And I think that we'll say the problem here was the fact that the Free State really were Dublin men, and they were hardcore activists from the War of Independence. And they were filled with this story that Kerry had done nothing during the War of Independence. And that's why I think it got particularly brutal in Kerry. And what happened is that the IRA in Kerry were then particularly well armed. So they were, both sides met each other really full on. And that would say it became just a total war of attrition, and that culminated in the events that Pat has described there in March 1923, when up to about 30 different fellows were killed in very dubious circumstances. In some cases, it was just outright murder. But just to go back to the events of Clashmealcon, if I may, Aero Lines had been involved in the shooting of a black and tan in Abbeydorney in March 1921. It was a man called John Grant. So he went up and he served in North Kerry. But when the Civil War came, believe it or not, Aero Lines didn't want to have anything to do with it. He wanted to just go back to his own job and not get involved in any civil war at all. But he was persuaded to rejoin. He was given the rank of Commandant of the 2nd Battalion. But in September 1922, a month after the Free State landing, he was captured with a granduncle of mine over in Rahy in Listowel at an IRA meeting where they were trying to discuss strategy. And in fact, quite a number of the leadership were captured at that meeting. And Aero Lines soon found himself inside in Limerick jail. And the events of Clashmealcon would never happen if Aero Lines hadn't escaped out of Limerick jail. Now, how he escaped out of Limerick jail is just very simple. There was a man from Palace outside Listowel, and he was due for release, and his name was called one day, and Lyons presented himself as that man and literally walked out. But Lyons was a very interesting character, a very likeable a man, a bit impetuous, probably a bit stubborn as well. And he got the train down, right, to Kerry. So he took the luxury of having escaped from Limerick jail to get the train down to North Kerry. And immediately before Clashmealcon, there was an ambush on a cycle patrol that were travelling out to doing a roundup in the Causeway district. And there was 9 members of the IRA in the party. And it showed the state to which the IRA had developed at this stage, that the 9 men were able to pin down a very substantial cycle column. But Lyons retreated ill-advisedly to the caves, but 3 of the men didn't. There was a Shea man and there was a Fuller man, and I forget the name of I think it was a Healy man was the third man. They took off for Ballybunnon, and then as now Ballybunnon was noted for its dances, so they went to a dance in Ballybunnon. Now, there was 2 other compounding factors in the Clashmealcon things. First of all, McHenry was a married man with a young child, and this played a lot on Lyons's mind and it led him to surrender. If it was all single men, I think that Lyons would have held out. Second of all, the shooting of the 2 officers there, Pearson was one of them. Once Pearson was shot dead by Lyons, he sealed his fate. There was going to be nothing else there except death for Lyons, whatever about the rest of them. But the supreme tragedy of Clashmealcon is that the Civil War was over when those boys were executed inside in Tralee. Now, you mentioned this thing about how valid was a surrender, and I think it really depended on who you surrendered to. And I think the circumstances of Johnny Linan in Listowel, who was another likeable lad, in April 1923 are worth investigating again. It's something that hasn't come up, it's probably just known locally. And look, we don't have time to be going into them tonight, so I just want to get in his name. But he was holding out in the field with the captain of the Listowel company, a man called Dick Bunyan, and a fellow called Jack Mullally. And I'd just like to say that Jack Mullally was after making a successful escape from Limerick jail. There was a mass escape out of Limerick jail in March 1923, and Jack Mullally was one of the few men that successfully got away, only to be recaptured on the day that Johnny Lennon was killed. Without getting into too much, I know we're kind of caught for time. There's some lovely songs from Kerry, and I have the note in my head, but maybe Pat has, but if someone had a verse of Ballyseedy Cross, to be a lovely way to finish up the story. There's some nice songs preserved in Kerry. Foley, the Boy from the Hill is one from the War side. There's a song about Johnny Lennon. Some of the newspapers accounts as well. It's nice to see that there is a balance in the newspapers. I have a good account here for maybe some other time of the events of Ballyseedy that were published in Scotland in a Republican paper within days of the events of the horrific events of Ballyseedy. There was an North Kerry man killed in Ballyseedy called Pat Hartnett, I knew, and niece of his. I was fortunate as well, just to kind of stuff in a few more bits and pieces. When I was young, that I knew the old brigade adjutant of Kerry number 1, he was a man called Con Casey. And a lot of people said that the old people didn't talk about the Troubles. And in my experience, that's not true at all. And they talked once you showed that you were interested in what it was about. I think, unfortunately, maybe with other political events going on, that it wasn't. Now would be the time, if they were alive, they would all be listened to and recorded and whatever. Like, I was fortunate enough to know Billy Mullins, who was the quartermaster of the Kerry number 1 Brigade, and Billy had gone to Dublin to meet Padraig Pearse on Easter Monday. So I like to think that I am a man that has met a man that got a 1916 medal. I knew some of the Fianna as well. Jake Scair in Listowel was in the Fianna. Brian McMahon, the well-known writer, was in the Fianna in Listowel, so it's nice to mention the Fianna. My grandaunt was a captain in Cumminaman, so we won't forget the ladies in case anyone says that we overlooked their contribution, which I would like to have included a bit more on tonight. Belty Willems was the brigade signals officer, and he lived in Oakview in Tralee. And I went up to him to talk to him at one stage, and he wouldn't talk to me at all, that he felt that his vow to the Republic meant that he couldn't be telling stories. So I went back to his officer commanding, who was still alive at the time, and I told him to talk to me. So he then consented to talk to me, and he had a very interesting story, including fighting up around Limerick and had been involved in one of the last ambushes in Kerry in the Civil War. That was the events of Durban na Fianna down near Carroll Lake, where Conway Connor lost his life along with a volunteer that was actually called George Nagel. I better shut up with that because I keep going all night. A few points.
No, you're great, Martin, and thanks a million for that contribution. I've one question to ask you, and it's a personal connection myself. So you'd have met Dan Keating a number of times, who'd be a townsmate of ourselves over there in Milltown. He'd been known to my father, probably my grandfather. Can you tell us a little bit about his life? Because he strikes me as one of these people. It's not black and white. It didn't kind of, his life transcended Republican history. So if you want to share a little bit about your knowledge of Dan, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I met Dan when he was just short of 100 years old. And it's hard to believe how fresh he was. He was known to all people. His name was Dan Keating, but he was known to everyone as Dan Bally. Just that's the way he was known. He was an immaculate dressed man, and he spent a lot of his life working in a pub in Dublin. And I just call out to him, and his knowledge. A lot of the people I met, the volunteers that I met, their knowledge wasn't so good. But Dan had a particularly good and insightful knowledge. You said things are in black and white. With Dan, things were black and white. And there's some very funny stories about him. I'm sure you heard the one about when he was interviewed by Radio Kerry, and he was asked about his interest about trying to move it away from politics. And he mentioned that he was going to all the GA matches. And he said, but I don't go anymore. And at the time, he was something like 104 or something like that. And someone said, is that because of your age? And he said, no, not at all. It's since they allowed the British Army join the GA. I refused to go. And I think there was a cut to ads at that time. But he was he was a right rogue now. Like, you could have great fun with him. In fact, a lot of the old boys were great fun like that. I remember having great fun with Con Casey. I was asking him about one family one night, and I was told that, well, their people work with horses. So just to expand the conversation, I asked, were they blacksmiths? And he says, no. Were they vets? No, they weren't. Were they jockeys? No. And I said, well, Con, I says, if they weren't blacksmiths and they weren't jockeys and they weren't vets, what did they do with horses, do you mind me asking? And he would smoke a pipe. And he says to me, well, Martin, he says, they were gelders. I don't know, did you get that one?
I think we got that one.
Yeah, very good.
Thanks a million for that, Mark. And we'll just pop over to Pat again. So I know Pat has studied a lot of our Kerry history, and particularly Charlie Daly. So Charlie would be a Kerry man who was killed or executed during the Civil War up north. So, Pat, you just want to tell the Charlie Daly story?
Well, he was. I'm not too positive about Charlie. I know he was from Fireys, and he was executed in Drumbo with Timmy O'Sullivan and Dan Enright and a volunteer from Derry, Sean Larkin. I was actually in Drumbo last August. I was at the execution site. The grave is actually still there. There's just a hole in the ground, just on the hill. Now it's very hard to find now, but they never filled in the grave after they were repatriated back to their relative parishes, like Sean Larkin back to Derry, and the two lads down to Listowel, and Charlie Daly to Kiltala. I was, like I said to you there last week, Liam. I was there, and like I said, it was raining. I never got a picture of Charlie Daly's grave, even though I was there. But basically he was very high ranking above in the north, the northwest. But this was a civil war. Other than that, no, I'm not too positive about his local involvement.
I think myself, he kind of came up the ranks there in Kerry, and a lot of the Kerry people were redeployed up to the north. He was redeployed up to Northern Ireland, ran up through the ranks very, very quickly. So he was a very quick leader.
What happened with him was he was arrested in 1917 for some events in his local place. Now, in 1916, there was a policeman shot in Fireys by a volunteer called Jim Reardon. So Fireys gained a name that it had at the time from, believe it or not, the time of the Land War. Fireys was the centre of the Land War. An awful lot of the events of the 1920s can be traced back to events of the Land War. In 1920, then, Charlie Daly moved to Dublin, and Collins appointed him as a divisional officer to reorganise Tyrone, right? He was in Tyrone. Following the treaty, Tyrone became part of the 6 counties, and Daly moved his column into Donegal, and he had men from Cork and Kerry supporting him, including, we'll say, Christy Broder of Dewar would be one man that went up, and Martin Quill of Listowel went up as well, and one of the Cliffords from Ballymac went up. And they were captured around November 1922. And seemingly their death, some people ascribe to an internal feud involving the Free State, where a man called Cannon was shot dead, and that the lads were executed around Paddy's Day in 1923, a week after Ballyseedy, in reprisal for that, which they hadn't hand actor part in. So they were in jail. So their shooting, whatever way you look at it, is illegal. And there's a bit more to the Civil War that we just couldn't cover in the short time we have tonight. But there was various reprieves given in October and in the spring of 23 to people to hand in their weapons. So these boys were inside in the Finner camp at that time. And I must mention one man from Listowel who happened, he was ill-nourished and he fell ill. He was put into the hospital, and he was an enterprising sort of a lad, and he escaped out of there and he came back down to Listowel. He quite liked it in Listowel, and he wasn't too long in Listowel when he was taken up to Limerick, and he escaped out of Limerick as well. He died unfortunately before his time in 1925. That was Pikey McElligott. So Daly was well liked, and I mentioned earlier on Con Casey, the former brigade adjutant that I was called into. Well, Con was married to Charlie Daly's sister. She was Susie Dawley. Of course, they were referred to down here as Dawley. They were never Daly at all. And as Pat has said, Sullivan and Inright from Listowel, they were lieutenants in the 6th Battalion up in Listowel, and Sean Larkin of Maharafelt were the main executors. Then in 1924, due to clamour from the relatives in proper order, the bodies were repatriated to Athlone, and from Athlone then they were given out to the relatives in the like Mayo and down to Kerry and where have you. That's covered in a lovely book called The 11 Galway Martyrs. Very well done, nice pictures there from that. And there's a nice poem about that. If I can't sing, I might chance a poem. So it's, my name is Sean Larkin, a rebel am I. In this cold dreary castle, a prisoner I lie. At the dawn of tomorrow, with my comrades I go, for death is my sentence tonight in Drumbo. And with Timmy O'Sullivan, then Inright tonight, and the brave Charlie Dawley tomorrow must die. And the lifeblood of Kerry and Derry will flow to mingle in union or the sod of Drumbo. So it is nice to remember all those boys tonight. So, Gramach go to Stockton, Okacho, Kirship Glaive, or Kun, couple of Focal Final Lake Ricama, or Kerry, the Treat Gokroga, or Sunday Sirsha, in Aimshire, in the Fihidi, Secunda shop. Mille boys.
Thanks a million, Martin, and thanks a million, Pat, for your contributions this evening. Much appreciated. Couldn't have done it without you. A bit of a technological disaster, but look, you know what? It's about the chat and it's about remembering these people and remembering what they've gone through on our behalf. So, thanks a million. We'll leave it at that. We know our point, but we still had a great evening. Ihawa, go there.
That's Drumbo, by the way.
Very good, John. Nice one, yeah. I've never been up there, Pat, but what I was showing there is I have the interment order for Tom Daly. I have it here myself. I don't know where I got it. Someone gave it to me, obviously. And it's signed by Mulcahy, and it's dated. I'll show it to you again. It's very interesting to